Cowboy blushed, admitting, "You're my first." The Black Widow swore he'd be her last. Dust swirls around the refined woman as the towering gunslinger stumbles over his words outside the saloon, their collision sending her mysterious leather satchel spilling legal documents across the dirt. The frontier town sneers at the polished black woman they mockingly call the dandy, certain she'll flee within days, crushed by the harsh wilderness that breaks city folk. The gentle giant Cowboy, dismissed as simple-minded by locals who exploit his trusting nature, becomes her unexpected ally when she recognizes intelligence behind his shy exterior. Unknown to the corrupt officials watching from shadowed doorways, she carries proof of stolen land worth millions, evidence that could restore dozens of families' legacies or destroy her if discovered. Will two underestimated outcasts expose the town's deadliest secret or become its next victims? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Millbrook's dusty Main Street. Lillian Hartwell stepped down, her polished boots hitting the dirt with quiet authority. Her navy dress remained pristine despite the brutal journey. The leather satchel in her grip never left her side. Snickers erupted from the saloon porch. 3 cowboys nudged each other, pointing at her refined appearance. The largest one spat tobacco juice dangerously close to her feet. Look what the wind blew in. City girl thinks she can handle frontier life. Give her 3 days before she's crying for home. Lillian ignored them. She walked toward the courthouse, her spine straight as an arrow. Every step drew more stares. Women peered from behind curtains, men whispered behind weathered hands. The courthouse clerk barely glanced up when she approached. His spectacles hung crooked on his nose. Papers scattered across his desk like fallen leaves. "I need to examine land ownership records for the territory." The clerk's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "What business you got with land records?" "Legal research. We don't take kindly to outsiders stirring up trouble." Lillian's jaw tightened. "I'm not stirring anything. I'm researching." The clerk slammed his ledger shut. "Records office is closed." She glanced at the sign, clearly stating office hours. 2 hours remained before closing. The sign says otherwise. Sign's wrong. Lillian memorized his face. She would return tomorrow, and the day after if necessary. Outside the courthouse, she observed the town's rhythm. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood emerged from the bank, his belly straining against his vest. He spoke in hushed tones with Sheriff Morrison and the banker. Their conversation seemed urgent, private. The sheriff's hand rested on his gun. The banker clutched a folder marked "Land Transfers." Mayor Blackwood kept glancing around nervously. Wasn't right. A commotion near the general store caught her attention. A mountain of a man struggled with heavy supply crates. His shoulders could span a doorway. His hands were gentle despite their size. The store owner counted coins slowly, too slowly. $12, Thomas. Same as always." The giant cowboy nodded. He pocketed the coins without counting them. Lillian had watched the transaction. She knew the supplies were worth $18 minimum. The store owner was cheating him deliberately. Thomas Cavendish noticed nothing. His trusting smile never wavered. He tipped his hat politely and began loading his wagon. Other townspeople treated him like furniture. They spoke around him as if he couldn't hear. Children mocked his slow, careful speech. Adults dismissed his attempts at conversation. Yet Lillian noticed something others missed. When the blacksmith mentioned a cattle sale from last month, Thomas recited every detail. The exact number of cattle, the buyer's name, the precise amount paid. His memory was flawless. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. Lillian walked toward the boarding house. Her room would be simple but clean. Tomorrow she would continue her investigation. The saloon doors swung open. Raucous laughter spilled into the street. Thomas emerged, stumbling slightly. not from drink, but from being shoved by men half his size. "Thanks for the entertainment, big guy. Come back when you grow a brain." Thomas's cheeks burned with shame. He hurried toward his wagon, head down. Lillian's path intersected with his. The collision was inevitable. Thomas crashed into her like a freight train hitting a fence post. Her satchel flew from her grip. Papers scattered across the dusty street like snow. "Oh no, oh mercy, I'm so sorry, miss." He dropped to his knees, frantically gathering her documents. His massive hands moved with surprising delicacy. Lillian knelt beside him. She noticed his careful treatment of each paper. His eyes lingered on the legal seals and official stamps. "You can read these?" Thomas's face turned crimson. "No, ma'am. I just know they're important, the way they're written, all fancy-like." He handed her the papers with reverence. Their eyes met briefly. "I'm not usually so clumsy around ladies. Truth is, you're my first." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "I mean, first lady who's ever been kind to me without wanting something." She studied his face, saw past the embarrassment to something deeper, intelligence masked by insecurity, strength tempered by gentleness. "Well, Cowboy, if I have my way, you'll be my last." Thomas blinked in confusion. Lillian's words carried weight he couldn't grasp. She gathered her papers and stood. The documents in her satchel contained explosive information, land grants dating back decades, death certificates with suspicious signatures, bank transfers that wasn't the only victim. The pattern was clear, systematic, profitable. Mayor Blackwood watched from across the street. His eyes narrowed as he observed their interaction. The sheriff appeared beside him. Both men's expressions darkened. Thomas helped Lillian to her feet. His hand was steady despite his nervousness. "Can I walk you somewhere safe, miss?" "That won't be necessary." But she appreciated the offer. In a town full of hostile faces, he was the first to show genuine kindness. As she walked toward the boarding house, Lillian's mind raced. The documents proved massive fraud. Dozens of families had been robbed of their inheritance. The conspiracy reached the highest levels of local government. Time was running short. The railroad deal would finalize within days. Once completed, the stolen land would be nearly impossible to recover. She needed allies, people who understood the stakes, people willing to fight for justice. Thomas Cavendish might be exactly what she needed. Lillian found Thomas the next morning behind the livery stable. He was mending a broken harness with patient precision. His massive hands worked the leather like a craftsman. "You have an excellent memory." Thomas looked up, startled. "Ma'am?" "Yesterday you mentioned specific details about cattle sales, exact numbers, perfect recall." His face flushed. "People say that makes me simple. Too much focus on little things." "People are wrong." She sat on a nearby crate. Thomas continued working, but his ears were sharp. "Tell me about the Henderson farm sale last spring." Thomas's hands stilled. His eyes grew distant as he accessed the memory. May 15th, Sheriff Morrison came with papers. Said old Henderson died of fever, had to sell quick to pay debts. Banker bought it for $200. Land was worth near $1,000. Who signed the death certificate? Doc Williams. But Doc was visiting his sister in Denver that whole month. Saw him leave myself. Didn't return till June. Lillian's pulse quickened. The pieces clicked together like puzzle parts. What about the Morrison place? The widow who lost her homestead? Thomas set down his tools. His voice grew quieter. Same story. Death certificate appeared. Debts needed paying. Banker swooped in like a vulture. How many farms? Dozens. Always the same pattern. Always the same signatures. Lillian opened her satchel. She pulled out official documents bearing territorial seals. Thomas, I need to show you something. His eyes widened at the formal papers. I can't read those fancy words, miss. You don't need to read them. You need to recognize them. She pointed to a signature. Is this the same handwriting you saw on the Henderson papers? Thomas leaned closer. His finger traced the letters carefully. That's Sheriff Morrison's writing. I've seen it enough times. This document says it was signed by a federal land commissioner, a man who died 3 years ago. Thomas's face went pale. The implications crashed over him like a wave. They're stealing land. Systematically, professionally, profitably. Lillian spread more documents across the wooden table. Each told the same story. Forged death certificates, fake debt claims, fraudulent signatures. My father owned 300 acres north of town, prime grazing land with water rights. According to these papers, he died of consumption and left massive debts. But he didn't. He died of a heart attack in my arms, left no debts. His land was worth enough to support a dozen families. Thomas absorbed this information slowly. His simple trust in authority crumbled. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only honest witness in this town. Your memory captures what others miss. She pulled out a leather notebook, pages filled with her careful handwriting. I've been documenting this fraud for months. Letters to territorial authorities, evidence packages, legal briefs. Thomas stared at her with new understanding. You're not just some city lady. I was a legal clerk in Santa Fe, studied law under Judge Martinez, learned every statute about land ownership and inheritance. The revelation transformed her in his eyes. The refined dress and proper speech weren't weakness. They were armor. What do you need from me? Everything you remember, every conversation, every signature you've seen, every detail that seemed wrong. Thomas nodded slowly. There's been a lot that seemed wrong. They spent the morning reconstructing the conspiracy. Thomas's memory was extraordinary. He recalled conversations from months ago, word for word. Names, dates, amounts, locations flowed from him like water from a spring. Lillian documented everything. Her pen scratched rapidly across paper. The railroad representative arrives in 4 days? That's what Mayor Blackwood keeps saying. Biggest land deal in county history. Using stolen property. Seems that way. A shadow fell across their workspace. Sheriff Morrison stood in the doorway, his hand resting on his gun belt. Morning, Thomas? Miss? His tone was casual, but his eyes were hard. Heard you've been asking questions around town, miss. Stirring up old business? Lillian met his gaze steadily. Researching family history. Sometimes family history is better left buried. The threat was clear. Thomas shifted uncomfortably but didn't retreat. Sheriff, this lady's been nothing but polite. Morrison's attention shifted to Thomas. That's good to hear. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings. He touched his hat brim mockingly and walked away. Thomas watched him go. He's never paid me any mind before. He's nervous. Guilty people always are. That afternoon, Lillian visited the courthouse again. The clerk remained hostile, but she persisted. She needed to examine the decades. She found what she was looking for in a forgotten corner. Original territorial land grants, hand-drawn maps, surveys from the 1860s, the documents that established legal ownership before the fraud began. Her father's name appeared on multiple grants. So did the names of dozens of other families, all legitimate, all properly filed, all stolen through clever forgery. She photographed each document with her small camera, evidence that would stand up in any court. That evening, she met Thomas again. His expression was troubled. Been thinking about what you said, about my memory being valuable.
It is.
Always thought it made me different, wrong somehow.
Different isn't wrong, it's powerful.
Thomas straightened slightly. Years of self-doubt began cracking. What happens when we expose them?
Justice, restoration. Families get their land back.
And us? Lillian looked him in the eye.
We become the people who stood up when it mattered.
Thomas nodded. For the first time in his life, he felt truly useful. What's our next step?
We gather enough evidence to bury them. Then we spring the trap.
The partnership evolved over the next 2 days. Lillian taught Thomas to recognize legal seals and official stamps. He showed her secret pathways through town where conversations could be overheard. Thomas's memory had been shaped by childhood trauma. At age 12, he fell from a barn roof. The head injury left him with splitting headaches for months. His parents feared brain damage when his speech became slower and more deliberate. But something remarkable emerged from the injury. His memory became photographically precise. Every conversation, every face, every detail locked permanently in place. People thought the accident made me stupid, Thomas explained as they walked through the cemetery. Maybe it did, but it also gave me something else. Lillian studied the headstones around them. Many bore recent dates, too many for a healthy community.
Your gift helped you survive. People underestimate those they think are simple.
They found what they were looking for behind the church. A storage shed filled with discarded records. The church kept copies of death certificates for burial purposes. Inside dusty boxes, Lillian discovered the pattern was worse than imagined. 47 families had lost their land through fraudulent death claims. The conspiracy stretched back 5 years. Thomas provided context for each name. The Hendersons had twin daughters in school. The Morrisons grew prize-winning corn. The Williams family had 6 children under 10 years old. All these people lost everything? Scattered to the wind, had to find work in other towns. Some went back east. Lillian's anger burned cold and steady. These weren't just documents. They were lives destroyed by greed. That evening, Mayor Blackwood confronted her outside the boarding house. His face was red with whiskey and fury. Around in town business. I'm researching family history. Your family history ended when your daddy died. Time to accept that and move on. Thomas appeared from the shadows. His massive frame blocked the lamplight. Mayor, the lady's been respectful. No cause for harsh words. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. He'd never heard Thomas speak with such quiet authority. Nobody asked you, boy. Didn't need asking. Just stating facts. The mayor studied Thomas with new suspicion. The simple-minded giant was showing unexpected backbone. You'd do well to mind your own business, Thomas. Both of you. After Blackwood left, Thomas walked Lillian to her door. That was brave and foolish. Felt necessary. He'll retaliate now. They always do when challenged. Thomas nodded grimly. Been expecting that my whole life. The retaliation came the next morning. Sheriff Morrison arrested Thomas on charges of cattle theft. The evidence was a branded steer found on his property, a steer that had been placed there during the night. Lillian watched from her boarding house window as they dragged Thomas away in chains. His eyes found hers across the distance. He nodded once, a signal that meant keep going. Now she worked alone. The town's hostility increased without Thomas's protective presence. Store owners refused her business. The hotel clerk found reasons to threaten eviction. Time was running short. The railroad representative would arrive tomorrow. The final land transfer would happen within hours of his arrival. That night, Lillian broke into the courthouse basement. Her lock-picking skills, learned from a reformed thief in Santa Fe, served her well. In the deepest archives, she found the master documents, original territorial surveys, hand-drawn boundary maps, the legal foundation that proved rightful ownership. She photographed everything by lamplight. Her small camera clicked repeatedly in the darkness. A noise upstairs froze her blood. Footsteps crossing the main floor. Someone else was in the building. She extinguished her lamp and waited. The footsteps moved toward the basement door. Sheriff Morrison's voice echoed down the stairs. I know you're down there. Lillian gathered her materials and slipped toward the back exit. The basement connected to old mining tunnels that ran beneath the town. She crawled through narrow passages, her dress tearing on rough stone. The tunnels led to the abandoned mining office behind the church. She emerged, covered in dust, but triumphant. The evidence was secure. The next morning brought devastating news. Thomas had been transferred to the territorial prison. The charges were upgraded to grand theft, based on additional planted evidence. But Lillian smiled as she read the telegram that had arrived during the night. Her ceremonial enthusiasm. Lillian watched from across the street. The man bore little resemblance to the railroad executives she'd met in Santa Fe. His bearing was too official, his questions too pointed. Federal Land Commissioner James Harrison had finally arrived. The elaborate ceremony in the town hall proceeded as planned. Mayor Blackwood spread maps across tables. The banker produced transfer documents. Sheriff Morrison stood guard at the doors. Commissioner Harrison examined each document with professional thoroughness. His questions grew more specific and pointed. These death certificates bear curious similarities in handwriting. "The doctor has consistent penmanship," Mayor Blackwood replied nervously. "Indeed, remarkably consistent for a man who died 3 years ago." The room fell silent. The trap was springing. Lillian entered through the back door. She carried her satchel filled with photographed evidence and documented testimonies. "Commissioner Harrison, I believe you'll find these materials relevant to your investigation." Mayor Blackwood's face went white. Sheriff Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped. Federal jurisdiction trumped local authority. "Miss Hartwell, I presume? Your correspondence has been most illuminating." The months of preparation crystallized in this moment. Every letter, every photograph, every documented conversation had led to this confrontation. Commissioner Harrison opened Lillian's satchel and began examining the contents. Original land grants, forged signatures, fraudulent death certificates, a complete record of systematic theft. "Gentlemen, you're under federal investigation for land fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." The revolution had begun. Federal marshals surrounded the town hall within minutes. Commissioner Harrison had arrived with a full investigative team, disguised as railroad workers. The elaborate deception had been months in the planning. Lillian's correspondence with territorial authorities began the night her father died. She discovered the forged death certificate while settling his affairs. Her legal training recognized the fraudulent signatures immediately. Rather than confront the corruption directly, she had chosen a different path. Document everything. Build an unshakable case. Coordinate with federal oversight. The months of investigation in Millbrook weren't random. Every question she asked, every document she examined, every conversation she recorded served the federal case. Thomas was the breakthrough she hadn't expected. His photographic memory provided witness testimony that corroborated every piece of documentary evidence. Commissioner Harrison spread Lillian's materials across the table, where moments before fraudulent land transfers were to be signed. Original territorial grants proved rightful ownership. Comparison photographs showed identical handwriting on dozens of supposedly different documents. Mayor Blackwood attempted to bluster his way through the crisis. "This is all a misunderstanding. Simple clerical errors." 47 identical clerical errors spanning 5 years. Sheriff Morrison's hand still hovered near his weapon. The federal marshals noticed. Their own hands moved to ready positions. "I wouldn't recommend that course of action," Commissioner Harrison warned quietly. The banker tried a different approach. He opened his ledger and began calculating frantically. "The money can be returned, full restitution, plus interest." Theft doesn't become legal through offered repayment. Lillian stepped forward. Her refined appearance now carried the weight of federal authority. "Commissioner, I request immediate release of Thomas Cavendish. The charges against him were fabricated to silence a key witness." "Granted. Marshal Stevens, see to it immediately." The marshal departed for the jail. Thomas would be free within the hour. Commissioner Harrison transformed the planned land ceremony into an emergency federal tribunal. Word spread through Millbrook like wildfire. Townspeople gathered outside the hall. Inside, Lillian presented her case with prosecutorial precision. She had studied law for this moment. Every statute, every precedent, every legal principle that applied to land fraud and federal jurisdiction. Thomas arrived still wearing prison clothes. The shackles had left marks on his wrists. His eyes found Lillian across the crowded room. She nodded toward the witness chair. "Your turn to tell the truth." Thomas approached with newfound confidence. Months of partnership with Lillian had changed him. He no longer saw his memory as a burden or his careful speech as weakness. Commissioner Harrison administered the oath. Thomas's massive hand dwarfed the Bible. "State your name and occupation for the record." Thomas Cavendish, farmer and witness to crimes. The last part surprised everyone, including Thomas himself, but it was accurate. Thomas began his testimony. 5 years of overheard conversations flowed from him with devastating precision. Dates, locations, exact words, specific amounts. His memory reconstructed the entire conspiracy. He recalled Sheriff Morrison bragging about forged death certificates, Mayor Blackwood discussing railroad bribes, the banker calculating profits from stolen land. Each testimony point corresponded perfectly with Lillian's documented evidence. The case became unshakable. Outside the hall, displaced families began arriving. Word had spread to surrounding counties. The Hendersons traveled 50 miles when they heard their stolen farm might be returned. Martha Williams brought her 6 children. They had been living in a single room above a mercantile store since losing their homestead. Old man Patterson rode in on a borrowed horse. His arthritis barely allowed him to sit upright, but determination kept him in the saddle. Commissioner Harrison called for additional witnesses. The families entered the hall with a mixture of hope and skepticism. They had been betrayed by authority before. Lillian recognized each name from her research. These weren't just case files. They were people whose lives had been shattered by systematic greed. Martha Williams testified about the night Sheriff Morrison appeared with papers claiming her husband had died of fever. Her husband stood beside her, very much alive, working in a lumber mill 2 counties over. Patterson described losing his ranch through fabricated debt claims. He had never owed money to anyone in his 73 years. The Henderson twins, now 14, spoke about watching their mother cry when forced to sell their farm for a fraction of its worth. Each testimony added weight to the federal case. The pattern was undeniable. The conspiracy was massive. The victims were real. Mayor Blackwood made one final desperate attempt. "These people are lying, coached by outside agitators." Commissioner Harrison's patience evaporated. "Marshal, place these men under arrest for federal crimes: conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and theft of territorial lands." The arrests happened swiftly. Blackwood, Morrison, and the banker were shackled and prepared for transport to territorial prison. As they were led away, Sheriff Morrison turned to Thomas with venomous hatred. "This ain't over, boy." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it is." The simple statement carried absolute finality. Commissioner Harrison addressed the crowd. "This tribunal will reconvene tomorrow for land restoration proceedings. Rightful ownership will be legally transferred back to original families." Cheers erupted from the gathered victims. Children who had never seen their family farms began planning their return. Lillian found herself surrounded by grateful families. They pressed her hands, offered blessings, promised prayers. But she sought out Thomas first. He stood apart from the celebration, still processing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "You did it. Your testimony sealed their fate." "We did it. Your legal work made my memories matter." The partnership had evolved into something deeper: mutual respect, forged in the crucible of justice. Outside, Millbrook began its transformation. Corrupt leadership was gone. Honest governance could finally emerge. The revolution was complete, but the restoration was just beginning. The restoration proceedings began at dawn. Commissioner Harrison had transformed the town hall into a federal land office. Maps covered every wall, Survey equipment filled the corners. Legal clerks documented every transaction. Lillian worked beside the federal team as an official consultant. Her months of research made her the foremost expert on Millbrook's fraudulent land transfers. Thomas served as chief witness, his perfect memory resolving boundary disputes and ownership questions. The Henderson family received their farm first. Martha Henderson wept as Commissioner Harrison handed her the restored deed. Her twin daughters clutched the document like a sacred relic. 300 acres with water rights, legally returned to the Henderson Family Trust. The twins had forgotten what their childhood home looked like. They would rediscover it together. Old Man Patterson shuffled forward next. His arthritic hands shook as he accepted his ranch deed. 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, stolen through fabricated debt claims. Never owed a penny to anyone, he whispered to Lillian. 60 years of honest work, and they tried to steal it with lies. The Williams family restoration proved more complex. Their land had been subdivided and sold to multiple railroad investors. Commissioner Harrison ordered full restitution at current market value, plus damages. Martha Williams calculated the amount in her head, enough to rebuild their lives and educate her 6 children. Thomas's family farm came up mid-morning. He approached the desk with quiet dignity. Prison clothes had been replaced with clean work clothes donated by grateful families. The Cavendish homestead, 160 acres with timber rights. Thomas accepted the deed with steady hands. His parents had built their cabin on this land 40 years ago. They were buried in its cemetery. "Thank you, sir, and thank you, Miss Lillian." She smiled. "You earned this through courage and truth." The railroad investors arrived by noon. They had expected to finalize purchases of stolen land. Instead, they found their money seized and their contracts voided. Most accepted the situation with grudging professionalism. They had been deceived as much as anyone. Their investment capital would be redirected to legitimate land purchases from willing sellers. One investor proved more difficult. James Crawford represented Eastern banking interests. He threatened lawsuits and political retaliation. Commissioner Harrison remained unmoved. Federal jurisdiction supersedes private contracts based on fraudulent documentation. Crawford stormed out, muttering threats about territorial politics and career consequences. His bluster impressed no one. By afternoon, 27 families had reclaimed their stolen property. The remaining cases required more complex resolution. Some land had been developed. Buildings stood where none existed before. Lillian proposed equitable solutions. Families could accept current market compensation or negotiate shared ownership with legitimate developers. Most chose immediate compensation to rebuild elsewhere. The courthouse clerk who had obstructed her research appeared before the tribunal. His involvement in the conspiracy had been peripheral but significant. He falsified filing dates and hid original documents. Commissioner Harrison sentenced him to 6 months territorial service and full cooperation with ongoing investigations. The clerk's encyclopedic knowledge of local records would help resolve remaining cases. Thomas found Lillian during the afternoon break. They walked to the cemetery where so many fake death certificates had originated. 47 families getting justice. Never imagined I'd be part of something this important. Your memory made the difference. Without your testimony, they might have escaped. Thomas studied the headstones around them. Real graves of people who had lived full lives. Not the fabricated deaths used to steal from the living. What happens now, when the federal team leaves? The town needs honest leadership, people who understand justice. They both knew who she meant. Evening brought community celebration. The hotel dining room overflowed with restored families. Children played games they remembered from before displacement. Adults planned rebuilding projects and shared resources. Lillian moved among the families, answering legal questions and offering guidance. Her expertise remained in demand as people navigated property restoration complexities. She noticed how naturally Thomas interacted with everyone. His gentle manner put children at ease. His practical knowledge helped families plan their return to farming life. The school teacher approached them both. The town needs a new school board, people who care about education and honest governance. She looked meaningfully at Thomas. His literacy had improved dramatically during their partnership. More importantly, his integrity was unquestioned. "I'd be honored to serve." Commissioner Harrison made his final announcement as the evening wound down. Federal oversight will continue for 6 months. New elections will be held for all municipal positions. The territorial governor has approved emergency funding for infrastructure improvements. Millbrook was getting a complete fresh start. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Lillian and Thomas remained behind. They had shared something profound over these weeks, a partnership that changed both their lives. "The territorial capital offered me a position as legal advisor." Thomas nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "That's a fine opportunity." "It is, but I'm considering other options." She gestured toward the hotel where families continued planning their futures. "This town needs its own legal advocate, someone who understands the people and their struggles." "You'd stay?" "I'd establish practice, help families navigate land law, inheritance issues, contract disputes, all the legal challenges that honest people face." Thomas's face brightened. "And I could help. Reading's getting easier every day. Memory's always been reliable." "Hartwell and Cavendish Legal Services has a nice sound to it." They shook hands formally, then laughed at the absurdity. They had been partners for weeks already. The town square emptied as night fell. Street lamps illuminated the courthouse where justice had finally prevailed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as families returned to reclaimed land. But tonight, satisfaction of wrongs made right. The partnership that began with an accidental collision had restored an entire community. 6 months later, Millbrook transformed beyond recognition. New storefronts lined Main Street, fresh paint brightened weathered buildings, children's laughter echoed from the expanded schoolyard. The Hartwell and Cavendish Legal Services office occupied the corner building across from the courthouse. Large windows displayed their simple mission statement: advocates for justice and truth. Lillian arranged legal documents on her mahogany desk, while Thomas organized client files with methodical precision. His reading skills had progressed remarkably. Complex contracts no longer intimidated him. Their first client of the morning was Maria Santos, a young widow navigating inheritance law. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving behind property claims and unpaid debts. "The mine foreman says I owe $300, says my husband borrowed against future wages." Thomas consulted his memory. "I was there when your husband talked about that contract. He specifically refused the advance payment, said debt was dangerous for family men." Lillian examined the foreman's documentation. The signatures looked suspicious, too similar to the forgeries they had exposed months earlier. "We'll investigate this thoroughly. No one will steal from you like they tried to steal from others." Maria left with renewed hope. Justice was possible in the new Millbrook. The Henderson twins arrived next. They needed help establishing a small business loan to expand their family farm. Traditional banking remained skeptical of young women entrepreneurs. "We want to grow cash crops for the railroad depot, vegetables for travelers and shipping crews." Lillian reviewed their business proposal. The numbers were solid. The market demand was proven. Only prejudice stood in their way. "We'll arrange a meeting with the Territorial Lending Office. Your plan deserves serious consideration." Thomas added practical insights. The old railroad camp needed fresh food constantly. Good, steady income if you can supply it. The afternoon brought their most challenging case. The Williamson family disputed boundary lines with new neighbors. Both families had valid claims to a water source essential for livestock. Thomas walked the disputed territory with surveying tools. His memory recalled the original boundary markers from years past. Metal stakes had been moved, but stone foundations remained constant. The creek runs 15 yards west of where they claim. Original survey put your property line right through that cluster of oak trees. Lillian drafted a compromise agreement. Both families would share water rights during dry seasons. Cooperation replaced confrontation. Evening found them reviewing the day's work. Their client list had grown from desperate families to prosperous businesses seeking legal guidance. The transformation extended beyond their office. Thomas had been elected to the school board unanimously. His gentle authority and practical wisdom earned universal respect. Young Billy Patterson is struggling with arithmetic. His grandfather thinks he's slow, but I recognize the signs. Memory differences? Like mine were. Different doesn't mean deficient. Lillian nodded. Thomas had become an advocate for children whose learning styles didn't match conventional expectations. The new mayor stopped by as they prepared to close. Rebecca Martinez had been elected on a platform of transparent governance and community development. The territorial governor wants to visit next month. Millbrook has become a model for corruption recovery. We'll prepare a presentation about legal reform initiatives. The governor specifically requested to meet you both. Your partnership represents everything we've accomplished. After Mayor Martinez left, Lillian and Thomas walked through the town square. Families gathered for evening picnics. Children played games under watchful parents. Merchants closed shops with satisfied expressions. Remember when you said I'd be your last? Thomas had wondered about that promise for months. I meant my last stop, running from belonging. I spent years moving between cities, never finding home. They paused beside the fountain where families gathered daily. The water ran clear and constant, fed by the same springs that made this land valuable enough to steal. You were my last encounter before discovering where I truly belonged. Thomas smiled. And you taught me that being different wasn't being broken. The courthouse clock chimed 8 times. Their workday was officially over, but their partnership extended beyond business hours. Mrs. Henderson invited us for Sunday dinner. Wants to show off her restored farmhouse. I'd like that. Been too long since I sat around a family table. They walked toward their respective homes. Lillian rented a small house behind the church. Thomas had rebuilt his family cabin on the reclaimed homestead. Tomorrow's calendar is full. 3 new clients and the Morrison property dispute. The Morrison case will be straightforward. I remember every conversation about those boundary markers. Their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper. Friendship forged in the crucible of justice. Mutual respect built on complementary strengths. The next morning brought news that validated their transformation. A letter from the territorial capital praised Millbrook's recovery as unprecedented in Western justice reform. Governor Williams requests a detailed report on your methodology for presentation to other communities facing similar corruption. Lillian began drafting their response, while Thomas organized case studies demonstrating their approach. Their method was simple but effective. Combine legal expertise with community memory. Document everything. Trust in federal oversight when local authority fails. Most importantly, never underestimate people based on appearance, background, or speaking style. A young family entered their office mid-morning, recent immigrants struggling with English and unfamiliar legal systems. Land developers were pressuring them to sell property at below-market prices. We don't understand the papers they want us to sign. Lillian examined the contracts, while Thomas listened to their story. His memory cataloged every detail for future reference. These contracts are deliberately confusing, designed to cheat people who don't speak English fluently. She began translating the legal language into plain terms. Thomas added practical context about property values and development trends. Never sign anything you don't completely understand. That's your right as property owners. The family left empowered rather than intimidated. Knowledge had replaced fear. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Lillian reflected on their unlikely partnership. A refined legal clerk and a gentle giant with perfect memory. Two people underestimated by society, who found strength in mutual respect. Their office sign caught the setting sun, casting golden letters across the wooden sidewalk. Advocates for justice and truth. The promise had been fulfilled. Justice prevailed through dignity, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to what was right.